Good morning everyone, I'm Tracy. I'm going to show you today how I use Microsoft Publisher to create my print editions. This actually was a request that I got from Tanya via email, and it's not something that I would normally show or talk about on Productive Indie Fiction Writer because it's not specifically production or prolificacy oriented, but because I seem to be unusual in that I use Publisher to set out my print editions, I thought I would do a quick video on how I use it. Publisher is, well, any desktop publishing, come to that, is complex, but it is quite often worthwhile learning the process. So let me just walk you through that a little bit. Why would you want to do your print editions for yourself anyway? The standard seems to be among indie authors is to farm out the work to subcontractors who do have professional desktop publishing programs and can create the PDFs that you need for distributors like KDP Print and Ingram Spark, and used to be CreateSpace, of course, but people like Draft2Digital and Barnes & Noble are also providing print distribution and print publishing these days. So you have very many options for getting your books in print and getting them out there. So doing a print edition becomes the next challenge as an indie author. Why would you want to do it yourself? Well, the big one, of course, is control, which is one of the primary reasons most of us are indie authors and not in traditional publishing, or we have one foot in the indie world for that reason. When you're doing your own print editions, of course, you're not at the mercy of someone else's schedule for doing the work. You also get to control how it looks, and if you're using a good desktop publishing program, you can control down to the pixel level exactly where everything gets laid out. That is something that's not possible if you're exporting from Word or from Scrivener. You can create all the editions that you need based on the one manuscript. So you can do large print editions, you can do an edition for Ingram Spark, you can do your Amazon edition, you can do the edition for Draft2Digital. There's various different types of print editions you can do these days. Hardcover is another possibility, especially if you're working through Ingram Spark. The other thing, of course, is if you're doing it yourself, your book does not end up looking like everyone else's. The formatter that you're paying to produce your print edition is quite possibly using the same template for every single author that asks for a print edition. So your book is going to look very, very similar to everyone else's, unless you're paying for tailored templates and tailored details. And of course, when you're doing it yourself, you can make it as professional as you want. And of course, the other big advantage is price. Your time is a lot cheaper than a formatter's costs. And if you can't afford formatters, if you're doing everything on a shoestring or keeping your expenses down, you can still get a good quality print edition and not have to pay for hours and hours of a professional formatter's time. There's quite a few industry standards for desktop publishing. The primary one that everyone uses, particularly in the traditional publishing arena, is of course Adobe InDesign. InDesign does everything. It controls down to the pixel level, but it's very expensive. And if you've ever had any experience with Photoshop, for example, InDesign is exactly as complex as Photoshop. It has controls and widgets and displays and tabs and dialog boxes all over the place. And if you've never used InDesign, it can be completely bewildering. The learning curve on it is quite sharp. And also it doesn't play well with Microsoft products, which may or may not be an issue for you. it is for me because I use Microsoft Office. So for all those reasons, I chose not to use InDesign, which was an option that I did consider for a while. You can subscribe to InDesign on a monthly basis, subscription software, but it is not a cheap per month cost. And if you're only producing 3 or 4 books a year, then it becomes very expensive, because for 2 or 3 of those months you're not using it at all. Just something to bear in mind for a minute. The other alternative you've got is to use an open source program. Probably the best out there is Scribus, and I've got the link there for you to see. Scribus does everything, almost down to the pixel level like InDesign. However, it's not very compatible with anything. It is incredibly difficult to cut and paste anything into it and maintain any sort of styles. I used Scribus for a while and gave up on it because I spent so much time correcting everything once I had it in there. All my italics disappeared, which was a big problem. But if you want to go that route, that is a possibility for you, particularly if you're using Scrivener, which I'll get to in a moment. The other option these days, the cool one, is Vellum, of course. But Vellum is only for Apple users. So if you don't use Apple, like I do not, I'm a PC person, that becomes an issue. However, it does create pretty good print layouts. I have seen the results and they are not bad. And Vellum itself is not unreasonable. It's I think about $250 United States dollars, that is. But that is a bit pricey for some people, particularly if you're just starting out. Vellum does everything for you. It is a set and forget program. You throw your manuscript at it, it produces a print edition for you that just pops out at the end. So if you want the no-brainer solution, Vellum is the one for you. However, it does not do everything. It does not give you control. You cannot control down to the pixel level. It dictates how pages are arranged. You have no choice in the matter. There's very few controls that you can adjust and change. And for that reason, all the books that are produced, all the print editions produced by Vellum look exactly the same. It's very easy to tell if a book has been laid out by using the Vellum program. That's another reason that I don't like it. Then we come to Microsoft Publisher. Now, Publisher is a joke in the publishing world. Be wary of this. If you delve into using Publisher for your print editions, it's probably something that you don't want to talk about too widely because Publisher is so disparaged in the publishing world. However, there are some major advantages to using it. It's cheap. And if you're already using Microsoft Office, it's free because it's part of the Office program. Part of the Office suite. The other thing is the keyboard commands are the same across Office programs. So if you're used to using Microsoft Word, particularly if you write in Microsoft Word, then most of the keyboard commands that you use are exactly the same. It doesn't mesh well with Scrivener though. That's one disadvantage you may want to think about. If you compose your books in Scrivener, there is a bit more messing around with Publisher. You may lose some of your styling, like italics, and you may have to mess around a little bit more, but you may find that the advantages of cost offset that. So that's something that you can consider. The other advantage, the major one for me, is of course Publisher plays very nicely with Microsoft Word. You can cut and paste and preserve all your styles. And if you already write in Word, then the translation is pretty much seamless. And I will explain that next. I'll give you a very quick demonstration of how Publisher works. When you're cutting and pasting from Word, I'll do a mock setup with a print book. print edition. I usually start off with here, this is my sample. This is the current Word master file that I use, that I create the print editions from. I also use this same master file to create ebooks as well. And when I go into that master file, I'll show you quickly. This is what it looks like. As you can see, everything is there in the master file. I have all the front matter. I've got the manuscript itself, and the title page is in there as well, which is up here further. And sliding down the end of the story and all the end matter, including at the very end the copyright information. Now this is my Word master file. It is from this Word master file that I create every other edition of the book that is published, including the print file. What I normally do is create a copy of the master file, because when I'm transferring and creating the print file, it tends to get a bit chopped up, and you'll see why in a minute. But I create a copy that I put into the print folder. I create a folder for the print editions. Now, the publisher file itself, as you can see, is a different name, and that's because what I have done is I have copied the previous book in the series. I've copied the publisher file over to this book in the series, and I simply rename it. So this becomes Warduke Printmaster March 2019, and then I can open it up. The Word file is already open because there is a lot of copying and pasting that goes on. And here I have, this is a single image of, as you can see, the title page that comes from the print edition. So if we go back to the print edition, find the title page, literally copy it, Control C, and then paste it, Control V, and then resize it so it matches the guidelines. Now, the actual file, if you don't have a previous book that you have built, you're going to have to create a template from scratch. And that means setting up your front pages, your headers and your footers, which I'll get to in a minute, and everything else that you would normally have in the file. So for the first time you do this, it will be a long and probably fairly steep learning curve, figuring out how to get everything where you want it for the template. But once you've done that, you can keep copying over book after book, and in that way you're bringing with you all the styles that you have used for the previous book, so the next book in the series look exactly the same as the previous book in the series, which is very useful and quite a time saver. Anyway, once you have your front page set up, which I've got there, usually what I do is hit Control S to save everything on a regular basis, although Publisher is fairly good at doing backups, but hitting Control S is a knee-jerk for me. Now you can navigate just by clicking here. This is what they call the navigation pane. It shows you all the pages there. You can click to get to the various pages. You can scroll down to see the ones at the end. And of course, this current book is the previous book, which we will replace slowly but surely. And it's simply a matter of working through and replacing everything. So here we have a slightly wrong sized, and that's another thing. When you set up your border guidelines, which are dictated by the publishing process, and KDP will give you gutters, which is these areas here, gutter sizes, trim sizes, so you have the margins, top, bottom and sides. The margin is the same on both sides, and then you have an additional gutter. In this case, we've got a margin of 1/4 inch from there to there, and also from top to bottom, so from here to here, it's 1/4 inch. It's also the same on this side. It's also a 1/4 inch, but there is an additional 1/4 inch that is the gutter, because the book opens up and is bound at the spine. You need extra room in the middle so that the text is readable and not buried in the folds. So that is the gutter measurement, which is dictated by how many pages are in the book. And that is generally a 1/4 inch unless you're doing very big books, in which case the gutter expands. That information is available with KDP Print, with Ingram Spark, with whoever you're putting your print editions through. They will have guidelines for what they want to see for the gutter size. But my books for each series tend to come out around about the same length, so I know I'm fairly safe in leaving this as it is for this one. Anyway, we're at the copyright page, so it's simply a matter of going through, and this is how easy it is. I just pick up the copyright information, take it back. Now I hit Control A to delete, and then I put the new stuff in and then bring it down. Why do I lay out my copyright pages like this? Because the traditional publishers, when I first started studying print books, would lay out their copyright pages this way so that everything's sitting down the bottom, and I've just done it that way ever since. I'm going to remove that so that it doesn't look like a live link. And here I've got, this is praise for the series. Now this doesn't change from book to book because I usually don't have reviews for the new book. It's new. There have been no reviews posted at that point. So I will have reviews for the series that I put in instead. So that page actually remains static. And for the sake of this exercise, all my maps. Now this is a possibility that you may, if you have a series that's incredibly complex, if you're writing fantasy, for example, any of your front matter you can put in, and you'll see that I've got everything set up with headers and stuff like that, which don't worry about that for right now. I'll get to that one. Then we have part 1. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is these boxes, these are text boxes. Everything is put into boxes in Publisher. And those text boxes, when you first set them up, they will be transparent. So they will look like that, which is not what you want, because that means that your headers and footers, so your page numbers and so forth, are visible. I've found the easiest way to deal with headers and footers showing where you don't want them to is to fill the text box with white, because it prints, it's invisible, but it makes it so that you can't see the text lying underneath. So we shift that to match the borders, the guidelines underneath. Now the headers aren't showing. This is another thing. If you're looking at print editions, you'll notice that quite often the left-facing page can be blank when you're working your way through the front matter, because they want everything to start on a right-hand page. It is a style decision. You don't have to do that, but it is a nice one if you can spare the pages. If you're trying to keep your page count down, then you wouldn't want to do it. But in this particular case, my style decision was that I wanted all the parts of the book to start on the right-hand page. So there is a blank page on this one with a blank text box covering up the headers and the footers so that they don't show. Headers and footers are generally not displayed on your front matter pages. Pick up any print edition that you have lying to hand and have a look at when the headers and footers appear. It'll be a quick lesson on when they should show and when they shouldn't. And this is actually one of the problems that Word exports have, is that you can't control this sort of degree of visibility and layout. Anyway, so we get into, now we're finally into the first chapter. Again, I'm starting on a right-hand page. That's a style decision. I could have chosen to start on the left, but particularly for chapter 1, I don't really like starting on the left. So the left-hand side is a blank page with the headers and footers not visible. And here we are, chapter 1. Now notice that the header is not showing, but the footer with the page number is showing. Now, how you control those is through the master page. When you go to the master page, this is what shows up on every single page in the book. And as you can see, these are fairly standard layouts. The author usually shows up on the left, and on the right is the name of the book, which we need to change for this book. Here we have number markers. This is the hash mark, is a code that says simply put the current page number in this place, and they are sitting in the left and the right hand corners. Once you've got the master page set up, you can close it and you go back to the standard view where the page number is showing now. And when we go further down, we have the header that I just changed showing up. Now this page here is actually the old chapter, and this is why I like Publisher, because I can hit Control All and just delete. Now I've got, for the purposes of this discussion, a blank chapter into which I can pour chapter 1. Now if I go back to my Word template, my master file, I find chapter 1, and one of the things you can do with Word is I can right click here and select a heading and content. The only problem is it doesn't pick this up. So this is what I actually do, is this is why I copy the Word file over, because I've got the cursor before this, and I'm just going to hit Control-Shift-Home, which marks everything previous to the cursor, and delete it. This is why you want to do a copy of your Word file. It's a bit freaky the first time you do it. Now I'm going to hit Control-Shift and number 8 so that my codes show up, and I can see that I have that one there. Now I go down to chapter 2 and I can go here. Now Control-Shift-Home again. That's got everything in chapter 1 copied, including the top part. And here again, this is why you copy. I'm going to cut that chapter, which is again a bit scary until you get used to it. And don't panic too much, because if something goes wrong and you need to get that back, you just hit Control-Z and it comes back. So I'm going to cut again, Control-X. I go over to my now empty chapter, Control-V to paste it. Now, good, I'm glad that happened. That just showed me something that I had forgot, and I do this every single time. Now see, this is where I said Control-Z gets everything back again. Your Word file will sometimes need a little bit of adjustment, not too much, but a little. If you're using styles, this becomes incredibly easy. But you'll notice that in the ebook version, and so therefore in my Word master file, everything is a jagged right-hand margin. In print files though, you want that right-hand margin justified. This is the text style. If you have a look up here, I'm using the text file there. That's the text style, sorry. Now, that's the basic one. This first chapter, which is the first line style, this first line is based on text. So any changes I make to the text style will copy through to here. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to justify. Now that just justifies that paragraph. I need every text paragraph, text styled paragraph, changed the same way. So I drop it down, I right click the text style, and I update text to match what's selected. And then everything changes, including, you'll notice, my drop cap disappeared. But that's fine, because the drop cap is one of the few things that don't transfer well over into Publisher. I don't do drop caps in every series, but I do it for this one. So now I'm not even going to bother changing that, although I could delete the paragraph and bring everything up, but I'm not going to bother with that one. So now I'm going to go back and highlight the chapter again. Now this probably seems very clunky at the moment because I'm going very slowly and showing you everything. Now Control Shift Home to get to the end, to the front, and then Control X to delete, to cut it. We've got just chapter 2. Now back, Control V to paste it, and there we are, we have it there. Now everything has transferred very nicely. The header image that I'm using for this one has transferred over exactly the same way as it was in Word, so it's in line with the text, which is how it was in Word. If you just cut and paste an image into Publisher, it will float, whereas I specifically want that image to be in line with the text so that it sits exactly the same way at every chapter heading. You'll also notice that this is Baker Signet font. This chapter heading has transferred over, whereas over here it's Book Antiqua. Now that is what I was saying about your styles transferring properly. If the style is already set up here with a font, in which case, in this particular case, the font is Baker Signet, which is what I wanted, then it just automatically shifts over. Whatever the style dictates in here overrides whatever is in Word. If the style in Word is not in Publisher, then it will keep the style. One of the other adjustments I need to make here is that my byline is double spaced, which I don't want. So I'm going to go into paragraph spacing, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. I go into paragraph spacing and change it to single line instead of double line, and then it sits as it should. I also am not very happy with the spacing underneath it, so I'm going to change that so that there is, let's try 8 points. No, I think I like it a little bit further apart. I'm going to do 12. And this is the sort of fine control that you can get with Publisher and the desktop publishers that will let you control everything. Vellum, for example, will not let you make these sort of adjustments. It just won't. Okay, now my byline style is exactly how I want it, so I'm going to go in and find the byline style and update to match selection. Notice how it's very similar to how you change styles in Word. This is why I like Publisher. Now, my drop cap, I don't even have to highlight the A. All I need to do is go up to my drop cap. Now, I have put drop cap on the shortcut ribbon because I use it constantly. You can do this too. It's very simple. You drop this down, click on More Commands, find the All Commands, and then look for the drop cap. And if you type D, that'll drop it. Oops. So, where is drop cap? There. And all you do is click it and add it there. If I hit add there, it's, in this case it's already on my ribbon. It'll add it there, which adds it up here, and then you hit OK, and now it's there. Once you have the cursor in the first paragraph, all you have to do is hit that. Now, I already have a custom drop cap set up, so all I have to do is click it. The first time that you use the drop cap, you'll have to go into the custom drop cap styles and set up the font and any other changes that you want to make to it. You can play around with this. Have a look how it's done in other print editions you have on your bookshelf. Or not. Drop caps are not a prerequisite. You don't have to use them. However, for me and my historical novels, it gives it that touch of antiquity, which I like. So once you have that drop cap set up as a custom style, all you have to do is click there and it picks up the first letter, and away you go. That's already set up. Now notice that because I did the justification over here, this is behaving itself now, that the paragraphs are all nicely justified. This little arrow here, remember I said that Publisher puts all the text into boxes, text boxes. What you do from page to page is that you have to connect the text boxes. When you copy over a book like this, the pages are already connected, and this one goes back. So you can go through this way and you can see that they're all connected and the text is flowing, and all you have to do now is go through and check that everything is behaving itself. And this is my divider, which copies over. This is why I make my master file so specific, because all the dividers are already in there, so I don't have to copy and put little diagrams in or pictures in or anything like that. It's all done for me. It just copies and pastes over, including, if you'll notice, the small caps for the beginning of the scene, which is a style that I use for this particular series. I don't always do that, but I quite like it, so I use it for this series in particular. Now we get down to, this is where, now, instead of having the arrow there, we've got the ellipsis, which means that the box flow has halted here, because in the previous book, that's where the first chapter ended. The first chapter in this book actually goes on further. So that's very simple. We just delete that chapter. Now, because the chapter has the heading hidden, all I do is drag it down, and there is the heading. Now, I have to connect this text box to this text box so that all the text, which is still there, it's just not visible, shows up here. I right-click, create a link, and see how the cursor is that little jug that looks like it's pouring lots of letters out. That's exactly what it's going to do. And I just click. And then now all my text has just flowed straight on. Then I go down and check, and we're at the end of the paragraph. Now sometimes this can be an issue, as you can see here. There is a carriage return missing. Now if I just hit enter, then everything lines up as it should. But we're also continuing on to the next text box here, because in the previous book this was chapter 2 and it was continuing on. So what we have to do is break the text flow there, and that here, see, it takes it away. Now the text ends there, there's no more. We can actually take out all the extra spaces down there, although it doesn't really matter in print editions because they just don't show, unlike in ebook formatting where those extra spaces can create issues. Now we go on to chapter 2, and again this is taking far longer than it would normally for me because I'm explaining every little step. But basically we drag this up to hide the heading. That one remains, of course. Go back, we have to pick up chapter 2, which ends here. Control Shift Home to highlight all of chapter 2, Control X to cut it, and then Control V to paste it. and then it always goes to the end of where the pasted text ends. So all you have to do is go back to the chapter. Now everything is behaving itself because I've set up bylines so that they're styled properly. This one just copies and behaves as I've already said it should, because I changed the style. Now I just delete, style the cap, and that's done. And I can go through now with the chapter and make sure that everything is behaving. Notice now this is a thing that you get with properly laid out books that you don't get with quite often with Vellum and others. The top line here is exactly level with that one, and if you don't have any odd spacing in the page, the bottom lines will also completely line up. They tend to get a bit wobbly if there is odd spacing in there. They don't quite line up here. But you can go through your chapter. Now, I don't like that sitting there. It should technically be up here. So what I'm going to do is the easiest way, and probably the instinctive way to do it, is to just put a space in there like that, which you can do. But then that leaves white space here that I'm not super happy with either. So the actual proper way to do it is, and this is what I was talking about, right down to the pixel control. I highlight everything that goes before in just that chapter, because the chapters are all separate contents, separate containers, I should say. Now that's all highlighted. Here is where you can get into your spacing. And what I'm going to do is I can shrink or stretch the selected text. And in this case, I just want it to nudge down a little bit. So I'm going to expand it by 1% and then just apply it. And that didn't work. It didn't drop it over. So I'm going to try 2%. There we go. And I hit OK. Now that is setting where I want it, and this is not miles up on the page. And that is how you control let me see if I can find one quickly here from the old book. You get, sometimes when you lay it out, you get to the end of the paragraph or the end of a scene, and you've only got one line on the next page, or you've only got 2 lines. My standard rule of thumb is I need 3 or more lines on the page for it to be a page on its own. If I've only got 3 or less lines, I try to either bring them over up onto this one, in which case you highlight the entire chapter and then shrink it by drop it down to 99% and 1% per time, just to see if you can get it to drop. Or if it won't drop, if the chapter is too short, there may be not enough lines there for it to adjust properly, you can expand by just go 101% and then 102% until you get enough lines drop over to the next page, so that you don't have the widows and orphans, the single lines there, or the 2 or 3 lines there that look odd. It's a way of adjusting it. If you have a look at any print editions that you have on your shelf, you'll notice that there are not widows and orphans. And here is one that I have actually adjusted, and you can see it shows up a little bit differently when everything's squashed down. That's only on the electronic file here. It gives you a warning that the text spacing has been adjusted. This is actually kerning when you're adjusting the spacing between the letters. This has been adjusted so to bring 1 or 2 lines back up onto this page. When I laid it out originally, there would have been 1 or 2 lines over here, and I wanted them up here. So the entire chapter was adjusted to make it look, you can see that the same adjustments there, to make it look neat and tidy so that you don't have those dangling lines there. And that's all you do. And of course you lay out your chapters one after another until you get to the end of your book, just picking up one after another. And then you have your end matter. The end matter quite often gets copied over from book to book, particularly for series. And you may have to adjust a few things here and there. I would copy over the next book, which is, in this case, this book, which is the next book from the previous book, is the book that we're actually laying out. So you put the next book in the series, if you know what it is. But one of the things that can quite often happen is that when you have laid out all the interior of the book, you end up with a spare page. There might be, say for instance, this ended on this page here instead of the right hand page here. Then you'd have a blank page here before you get into your end matter. It is to a degree personal choice. You may choose to just leave that as a blank page and drag your borders up for your text box so that the header and footer are hidden, and then go into your end matter. Usually what I like to do is, if that right hand page is blank, I will drag everything up, and it's very easy. So I'm going to put that over there. Oops, hang on, let's try that again. I'll put that over there, go back here, and then I literally just drag it in. And of course this one I have to hide because that wouldn't be there. So there, and then that just shows up there, and everything else gets adjusted. It's really just simply a matter of dragging and dropping the text boxes. And then you can adjust your end matter. You will always have this one odd page here because all print editions, all print files must have even numbers of pages. And that because you've got a front and a back on each page, so there will always be multiples of 2. So you may end up that your final matter, your end matter, finishes on this page here. You will have a blank page here. And that must be included, or else your page count will be out of whack and you'll get error messages from everyone every time you try to upload your file. Plus you won't be able to calculate your spine properly for your cover. So make sure that that page is there, and of course this one here, because that is a right hand page. And that's it. There are a lot of details, of course, but when you work your way through setting up your first template in Publisher, most of the details you will learn just through setting up that template and your first book. Once you've got your first book, it becomes so much easier to lay out your next book. Plus you'll start looking at various books. Let me show you this. I've got some samples already set up of books that I have done. This one is another historical, and you can see this is standard. So let me go back for a bit. I'm tripping over myself. Of course, the other advantage with Publisher, which I did not put at the beginning of this video, is that you can print to Adobe, and it takes a second to compile because this is a pretty big file with a lot of detail, but I'll just wait for it to print. Now Adobe, when it is connected, you can set up printer properties for high quality print. Now what that does is that will embed all the custom fonts. It will give the file the correct resolution. It will preserve it to black and white if that's how you've set it up. You can set up your print page size so that it prints this way. You can, if you're doing a test print, you can add crop marks. It gives you full control to create a print file exactly to the specifications of the Publisher platform that you're using. And then once you've got that set up, and of course the print file properties transfer over when you copy over the Publisher file because it's embedded in Publisher. And then I can print again, Control P will give you the print dialog box. Sorry, I'm in the wrong program. So it's ready to go. I just hit print and save it to whatever the file name convention is that you use for your print files. So this is the PDF rendition of the print file from Publisher. And as you can see, this one's got slightly different. Because it's a Victorian era historical romance. There's lots of flourishes and there's lots of curlicues, and if I get to, I know there's a divider in here somewhere, scene divider. There we go. There. The scene divider is very Victorian and flourishy too. The headers and footers are in a script. It's the only time that I will indulge myself with some of the flourishy scripts. You don't want them in the text because that makes it difficult to read. But for something like a Victorian historical romance, I can indulge myself a little bit, and I think the readers appreciate that too. So that's historical romance. Here is the same series that I just laid out in Publisher, but this is the large print edition. This is something that is possible when you're using Publisher, is that you can create, and it looks very odd here. It is 8 by 10, and minimum size font is 14 pixels. But other than that, it is very similar in layout to the normal print edition. But it is an option that is available to you when you're doing your own layouts. And then this is another series. This one is time travel, paranormal romance with vampires. But because of the historical elements, I was able to indulge myself a little bit there too. But not quite as much. As you can see, that the chapters are much simpler. The dividers, when I find one, there we go. In this case, the divider, of course, is a sand clock. So, and again, I'm using the small caps for the start of the scene. And on a completely different note, this one is a thriller, romantic thriller, so very different in styling. And this is a possibility when you're doing your own layouts, is that you can adjust the layout. As you can see, the chapter layout headings are very different. I'm not using drop caps. It's very straightforward, much more streamlined. And these are all possibilities that you can do when you're doing it yourself. I hope that that was a useful demonstration, and I encourage you to try laying out your own books simply to give you the control and to maybe save you a little bit of money.